You're listening to The Threshing Floor.
Welcome to the Threshing Floor. I'm Randy Maugans. We are doing video for this. This is Threshing Floor TV as well. What if everything we knew about the original text of the Old Testament were challenged? And what if now God the Creator chose to open up understanding about Himself, His promises, our past, and our future at a crucial moment in human history? Would He use the pedigreed professors of linguistics and theology, the same doctors of the church who took over for 1,600 years and rode roughshod over believers? What if the truth about who He is and who we are became a matter of simple language hidden in plain view for thousands of years, waiting for the restoration at the end of the age? What if all the rules no longer apply? My guests for this show are Chris and Michelle from the Chronicle Project, and we are going to delve into the restoration of the original Hebrew language and what it means to you in understanding the Scriptures. Chris and Michelle, welcome.
Hi, Randy. Nice to be here again.
Yeah, and a lot of the listeners need to know as well that we did originally shoot a video about a month ago. That video is released on YouTube, part of it anyway. We lost part of it in the process of recording, the process of learning how to do video. So I guess where we'll start with this tonight is give us some background on how the Chronicle Project began and where this adventure started as you were uncovering this mystery.
Wow, backing up again, 4 years. About 4 years ago, being Jewish, we study ancient Hebrew, and the more you get into it, the more you start to see that the very large rule books, and believe me, they're big ones, for how the language works is unbelievably confusing. And I started one day thinking to myself that we have experts that have been doing this for 20 years, translating. I mean, they breathe the language day in and day out. They still need the books. And if you have 3 experts in a room, they'll disagree as to exactly how something is supposed to be translated. And the thought coming to my mind is, I'm supposed to believe that after 20 years you can't have this language down, but a 6-year-old shepherd boy can speak this fluently. And you see the problem there. That simple logic told me there was something extremely wrong. So we started looking at the texts that were there and delving in and saying to ourselves, there's no way there can be this many errors on error, on error, on error, and still they're telling us you have to believe it this way, don't question it. So what we came up with was the simple idea. If this really is the language of higher being, then it should display that somehow. And so what we did is we took the rule book, we threw it away, and we said we're going to observe what's here, ignore the rule book, and see what comes out of simple observation. Mm-hmm. And so we started looking at the texts and just seeing if there was simple patterns that might show up that would be a little better than the rules that are applying right now. And Kim, who's not here at the moment, was reading through the Strongs and came across the word to tear. And she noticed that the word to tear has 2 letters, and when a 3rd letter was added, it changed how the word was the direction of how the word went. So, for example, you add a letter, it was to tear down. Different letter, tear off. different letter, tear into pieces, different letter, changed it every time. And she said to me, do you think that this pattern might, in any way, show up more than this? And so what we did is we started looking for any other two-letter words and then watched how the word changed when the next letter was added. And sure enough,
a pattern emerged.
A pattern emerged. Exactly the same direction occurred every time the same letter was added onto the two-letter word. And so what we started to do from there, and at that time we thought just a simple pattern. We didn't think this was any major breakthrough. So what we started doing is simply assembling all the words we could find, watched how they were affected by the letter, and after a while, after seeing it enough times, you started to realize that there was a specific word that was attached to that direction. And 4 years later now, I guess 4 years, we have the fully assembled work. And boy, do I wish it was that quick. But that was a long 4 years, really a long 4 years.
Now, back up for a minute, if you will. You have 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet.
Right.
These letters are what you call glyphs. Explain the concept of a glyph and how that plays into what you call the self-defining Hebrew.
Sure. The reason we're calling them glyphs instead of letters is a letter is something that you find in a phonetic language such as English. And it's very simple. If you have a glass, it's spelled G-L-A-S. Okay, very simple phonetic language. And that's how that works. And the only reason we know that this is a glass is because we've memorized that English word. There's nothing in the word glass that would help whatsoever in knowing that from outside. The Hebrew is constructed on a different base, which is quite fascinating. Each letter has a concept, a universal concept, which a person can do that motion with their hand. For example, the shan, which it looks like a W to the average person. Anybody who sees Star Trek is going to recognize this because Leonard Nimoy actually took this, because when the Kohen are blessing at the temple, or sorry, at the synagogue, you turn your back and then they hold their hands like this. This is also, 2 shans is the number 6. And you can see why. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's why. So the shan is to project. And so they hold their hands like this because they're projecting the blessing upon those there. Okay? So what it is once it no longer becomes a phonetic sound, but it's applied a concept, then it's a glyph. It's simply a shape which has the universal concept attached to it. And this idea that a language was constructed like this was theoretical only. And basically now we've found it, and it's our personal belief that it's not just this language that does it. We believe also that Aramaic is the same, and Arabic is the same, and potentially even Coptic Egyptian is exactly the same. And they're all based, but this concept was lost over the last little while, and people believe that a word is a word because that's the memorized sound. Now, how the glyph set works is simple. You take the 22 words, and if you mix 2 of the concepts, I'll give you an example of mixing 2 concepts. The word sham is made up of the sheen and the mam. I should point out, by the way, if our pronunciation of the words, or sorry, of the glyphs differs as we're talking, it's because we've set up a system to strip away all of the extras, but we still have to communicate in the old system. So sometimes you'll hear us say one sound. They'll say sheen, we'll say shan, because we put a soft A between everything. They have multiple different sounds between each of the letters because they thought that the words could have 20 meanings, and so they would have a sheen, a shin, a shan, so that you knew which one they were talking about. Anyway, so the shan means to project, stick your hand out, and the mam means to raise up. So if you do this and then do this, that's the concept. To project, to raise up, it means to draw attention to. That's the word for name. It's your to draw attention to. And in Hebrew, a name isn't something like Dick or Bob or Terry. It would be actually a descriptive words about what the person is like. And so that's how the language works in basics. There's a little more complexity to it than that, but it gives you a rough idea. 22 letters, or glyphs as we call them, one universal concept on each glyph, and then you mix them together, and when you do, a word isn't a word, it's a description. And because it's a description, no longer can you translate the word based on your bias or on doctrinal pressures, because the description is there. And as I was talking about, the word sham is to draw attention to. That word is translated a lot of ways that have nothing to do with the word name or draw attention to. And it's been changed to fit sentences. But now we found that there's only one definition for each glyph set, not 84, not 5, 1. And that is where the change has come in, because when we applied this to the Old Testament, starting with Genesis, it rewrites a lot of stuff.
Can you give me kind of a concept of how you approached existing scriptural rendering? Let's just begin with Genesis. How did you begin to unfold the new translations that you found? And again, we want to correct this. You have stated on your website these are not translations, these are restorations.
Right. Right.
So you approach the book of Genesis looking at the present English translation or using the Hebrew text that we presently have. Is that correct?
Yeah, we used, actually Kim found it off a website.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know if I'm not speaking loud enough. Kim actually found original texts on the website. I forget which site she went with.
If anybody needs it, it's Macon Memory, and they contain all of the text that we're working with, so that it's open text. Anybody can go and use it.
Okay, and this is Hebrew, correct?
It is Hebrew,
okay.
And this is the first time in history that the whole thing has been translated straight from the original Hebrew text, without doctrinal pressures and without input from the Vulgate or from, any other source. This is straight from the Hebrew, and a lot of
the most accurate they have available.
The most accurate that we know of. And a lot of people will say, "No, come on, wait on a sec here. That's that text isn't that old. Blah blah blah." That's not the point. The point is not how old the text is. The point is this system exists within the text, and there's no language on the earth that was known to be like this. You cannot have this language develop up from a bunch of people sitting around a fire picking, stone, stone, and everybody picks up that word. This isn't. This is a language that took massive input, massive calculation in order to be able to develop only 22 concepts that can form together to form thousands and thousands of words. There's no end to what you can do with this language. And it could not have evolved. If it couldn't have evolved, it means it was present at the beginning of wherever this started.
But it's wonderful in the fact that it is adaptable. As our society grows and changes, you can still incorporate new words.
Yeah, they can make words up to fit whatever they're doing.
And yet it doesn't depreciate the language.
Right. Now, I'd like to point out several things before we go any further. The language cannot incorporate words from outside sources.
Like that glass again.
Right, like the word glass, that cannot be incorporated into Hebrew. Modern Hebrew, yes. Ancient Hebrew, no. And here's why. When they heard a word, in this case, glass is what they would hear, glass. Mm-hmm. So they would then in their head hear the g sound, which means to fold, the L sound, to, and the s sound would be to enclose. So to fold, to enclose. So if I held this up and said, this is a to fold, to enclose, they'd be like,
no, it's not.
That's not. That's a to pour. And so you can't incorporate words from outside. So if Hebrew words exist in other languages, it's because they were exported. And because this can't import, the language can't be diluted. The second thing is, because it works on a description, each word is a description, you can't use the word, see, if I said, Randy, that's a really cool shirt you have on. In English, that could mean it's not keeping you warm, or it's very stylish.
Yeah.
Okay? You can't do that in Hebrew. And so because of that, the language can't be distorted either. The meaning's maintained, the language cannot incorporate, so it maintains, and after 3,000 years, there wouldn't be any change in the language, which is brilliant.
We're going to take a break here, and when we come back, we're going to continue pursuing this a little bit more with the Chronicle Project here on the threshing floor.